Welcome. We are delighted to welcome David Heath, who came with me in April to visit various sites in the Veneto by Carlo Scarpa, and we combined that with seeing some frescoes and paintings by Giambattista Tiepolo. And what links them is that they were both, if you like, the late flourishing of Venetian art and design, and both people who we admire very, very, very greatly. So David is going to start by talking about three buildings by Carlo Scarpa, and you want to press the go button. Yeah.
I'm going to go this one. Yeah. So, yeah, Carlo Scarpa. This is the great man. Very friendly. Nearly always photographed with a beard and a hat. Not always with a cigarette, but I think the cigarette was pretty constant. So, just a few details for those who don't know anything about him. He was born in Venice in 1906. He spent a little time away, but he then came back to Venice, and that's where he trained as an architect at the Academy of Fine Arts in Venice. And he then taught at the Academy from 1926 until his death, which was in 1978, so for a very long time. But he never took professional practice exams, so he never fully qualified as an architect. And the reasons for this are a little obscure, but maybe to do with what life was like politically in the late 1920s and early 1930s in what had become National Socialist Italy and Mussolini. But the long and the short of it is, for his professional career, he couldn't practice on his own. He always had to practice with other people. But he started off really as a designer of class and exhibitions, and it wasn't until after the Second World War, when he was already in his 40s, that he became an architect in what we would recognise at the term. But he liked spending his time on site with craftsmen, revising and refining his designs and details. And this is really important because the drawings of his buildings, certainly in an as-built version, seldom exist. The buildings are their own record, as it were, and you'll see that as we go around. He also didn't write articles very often, and he gave a few lectures, but they're seldom recorded. And what's most interesting about him now is, in a world in which everything is so international, is that he worked almost exclusively in Venice and the Veneto, and often on buildings which already existed, and he then added, and he died in 1978. So this is an idea, this is sort of what his drawn records can look like. And you'll see this is the Bryan Chapel, which we'll come to later on. He drew in pencil, and he did annotations in colour, and he went back to drawings, and he used them on site. And these became effectively the final record. They're very hard to interpret, and very hard to interpret even if you know the buildings. And this is just a few maps of where we were and where his work is. So he's in Venice, and then these other sites in the Veneto. And where that is here is essentially between the Adriatic and the Dolomites. So the flat plain of the Veneto. He's the bearded one. One with a cigarette, and these with two of his pals. He was known, but not very well known, but the sort of people that he knew, Frank Lloyd Wright here and Louis Kahn, put him into rather a special category. And there's this great story that Scarpa met Frank Lloyd Wright in 1951 when Frank Lloyd Wright came to Venice, and Scarpa couldn't be there because he wasn't a proper architect. But Frank Lloyd Wright looked around and said, "Which one of you is Scarpa?" and selecting him to be part of his two-man escort around Venice. Dismissed all the other architects and went with Scarpa. So here's the first project I'm going to show you, the Castelvecchio Museum in Verona, which he worked on for quite a long time for this person who was the director of the museum from 1955 to 86. And they really worked together for a long time. And Scarpa worked there almost till he died, various projects. And you'll see why in due course. This is what the outside of the castle now looks like, with the main entrance through under the tower. And this is a plan as it was in 1802. So it's a courtyard castle in which it's guarding this river frontage. But in the period of the Napoleonic Wars, it became occupied by the French, who built a significant barracks along the north side of the courtyard, which subsequently was turned in the 1920s into a museum. And the person who did that work thought the thing to do working in a historic building would be to do something that was Venetian Gothic. And there it is on the left-hand side, but this is also then in the late 1940s, after Allied bombing, when the building was like this. So when Scarpa arrived, this was a building rescue project. Reviving the museum, putting roofs on, putting things back together was a really, really major task. And that's why it took so long. But that's then that side which has been repaired. What's very interesting about this, of course, is we think of Carlo Scarpa for two great things, or at least I do. One is he's really, really good at repairing old buildings. And secondly, he's quite remarkable for his ability to design new interventions in historic buildings. And people who have both skills are extraordinarily rare. They always were, and they still are. But this one is quite interesting because the more you go into it, you think what you're looking at is a repair here, but of course it's a repair of not a Venetian Gothic building, but this early 19th century, this early 20th century version of Venetian Gothic, of a refacing of a Napoleonic barracks. And then because it wasn't real, Scarpa found the opportunity to move things around. He moved the entrance, he moved various windows, but he also did things like, you can see his places where he left this unrendered part of the elevation, which appear to indicate important parts where he might have left something historic. I have no idea, I've never been able to work this out. You, Richard?
No.
But to give you onwards, here is the sort of intervention he then made. One of the doors came out with this boxed enclosure, which is a quite remarkable thing, even in adding to a 1920s Venetian Gothic. And it's here we are. We all know this. Carlo Scarpa fans really know this. That's me, and this is Richard. Because this is the sort of thing that he spent a lot of time on site looking at, Scarpa, with the workmen. This is one of the parts of building for which there is a record joint, which is this. So what's going on here and why he's doing it? Well, I suggest you go and look at it, because actually what it is very clever. He's repaired the rest of the building, the towers, the walls, and the tonal values of all that stonework and his new stonework and his concrete are all going together. It's not as absolute as you think it's going to be. It's very clever stuff. It's extremely difficult to photograph and very subtle. And all of my talk is going to be recommending that you go and look at it for yourself. What he does from that box is inside he puts places to display things. And in the 1960s, this is principally what Scarpa was known for, was his exhibition design. So this is the inside of a Napoleonic barracks which he's come to make look like a medieval chantry, I suppose, or hard to say. But with this sort of display, white things go on, black things, and the mounts was incredibly influential. This sort of all those detailed brackets and things. What I particularly like are also this sort of conservative repair. You don't mess around with restoration. You put in the missing bits in a frankly modern way. That wasn't something anybody really picked up on like that. And then his design interventions are themselves quite extraordinary. In a tower, that's Richard examining, and we're pretty uncertain about the structure of this, but it's pretty robust. And then looking back from the tower, he really was interested in the gardens, he was interested in the repair. If you look at the roof structure at the end, that's where a staircase was that had been damaged. He didn't put it back. Look at this man on a horse, not square on its brackets. It's an extraordinary way of doing things and very, 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 very influential. He was very pleased with it. It has very little changed. That's him in the middle, and this is Richard and I. The next one, I must be quick. Olivetti's showroom. Shortly after this, he was employed by the Olivetti company, who are the makers of really fancy, top-of-the-range typewriters at this stage, for them to have a showroom just in the Piazza San Marco. And this is a Google Maps. You can see it's saying Olivetti to top left. That's where it is. So lots of people have visited San Marco and not been at all aware of Carlo Scarpa. And this indeed is the view. And his intervention is the shop, which is behind the two arches to the left of the third and fourth in from the left-hand side, like this, in an arcade, onto a side alley going through. And when he does things, he really is his own man. His doors, which are made of stone, are something that he does extraordinarily well. The Olivetti sign, he can do that like this. This is at the entrance, in 3 dimensions. He works very closely with metal workers and ceramicists. And then you see that looking back to St. Mark's. But inside it is this 2-story display, which is still there. It's owned by a Italian National Trust equivalent, who use it to display Olivetti machinery, now considerably old. And it's very interesting how modern Scarpa can look, but sometimes these sort of contemporary things, like the typewriter, how old that looks. It is interesting how buildings date. So up those stairs, there's a first floor with a Barcelona chair and this sort of display of Olivetti machinery. Stairs is the great triumph. It is a quite extraordinary thing. No handrail, of course, but looking like this. Really, really a lot of care gone into it, and it's very comfortable to walk up and down. And then we're looking down again here, and the ground floor is paved with lots and lots of different bits of Murano glass, which is what he started off working in the 1930s. And this was terribly influential, this sort of flooring. There's also a sculpture with a water feature there. It's really lavish. And this sort of floor with a drain. It's magnificent stuff. I do strongly recommend that one. And there you are. Most people can go up and down Piazza without seeing that at all. But it is this way in which you've got completely modern stuff combined with repairing and retaining old stuff. It's a fantastic trick to be able to pull off, and really, really, I do emphasise how few people can do it. Last one. the Brion monumental tomb, which he worked on from the late 1960s to the end of his life. And this was a tomb where he was commissioned by this Honorina Brion after the death of her husband in '68. She didn't die until 2002, but she was around to commission him. And this is the sort of thing that the Brion Vega family firm made. This is a 1965 what is it, record player, I think you have to say. So they had lots of money and they moved to Milan to make these things. But when he died, she said she wanted him to be buried in the local cemetery, which is here in the middle of nowhere out in the Veneto. And you come to it across agricultural fields, and there's a concrete wall around it. And this is your introduction to Scarpa and concrete. He is the great poet of in situ concrete. There's almost nothing here which he did which isn't in situ concrete. But it's quite hard to understand. So this is, you don't often when you visit get much clue as to what's going on. So I'm giving you one that you can find. The cemetery is the oblong to the right. That's the village cemetery. And what the Brion family managed to buy was an L-shaped piece of land going up to the left around there. And it includes really much more space than Scarpa thought was appropriate. So he tried to make it into more of a garden and separate the things that he did. So the traditional part of the cemetery is like this. And then the bit that the Brion family bought is to the other side of this wall here. And you approach it through this sort of tour de force of in situ concrete. He called this a propylaea, so he was definitely thinking of it as a Greek entrance to a temple site. And you can see lots of things to do with his the recessing planes, the way things are not symmetrical but are symmetrical. You know, the staircase is off center, but the arches at the far end are, when you approach them like this, extraordinary things. Quite unlike anything any else has done. That's the other side into the garden part. And then coming back, this is then the tomb itself, which is what it looks like. It's a bridge, and underneath the bridge, this is the two tombs of the husband and wife. So he was buried there, and she wasn't buried there till 2002. And he had this idea that it would be nice if they were leaning together. That isn't the camera. That is what they're leaning together in life. And then there's this water that comes through and flows underneath. So there's all sorts of things going on here. It's quite remarkable stuff. But then I'm going round the corner, and this is then the chapel. So you would come in the other direction through into a chapel and then up to the tomb itself. The chapel featuring water, in situ concrete and receding plains. And I just invite you at this stage to look at the heart on the right-hand side. There's a wall with sort of punctured openings in it. And all of the stuff to do with the concrete which is going on there, it's very hard to understand. But from the inside, they're either side, those four lights that light the altar in the chapel. This is the chapel. Quite extraordinary stuff. This is one of Scarpa's, I have to say, clearer drawings. So the pretty much looking in the same direction we're looking there. There's the altar, is in the middle, and there's a square with a light over the top. It's a completely square plan. But the entrances and the views out are by no means straightforward. All beautifully worked on. It has been, I should say, probably at this point, recently repaired. So the family, after she died, Lena, I think, she was buried. They repaired the whole site and then gave it to the same museum body that looks after the Olivetti showrooms. So they're both well looked after now. This is the entrance to it. Extraordinary. I mean, working out, as people like Richard and I do, how you could actually set up the castings to do some of this work. Takes us some time. But it's all in situ concrete, often with the gap between the boards expressed to give an additional articulation. And what I really liked in the recent repairs was these are repair patches. You can see that people have tried to respect that. Very, very, very difficult to repair boardmark concrete if any of you who've tried, but I think this is really quite remarkably successful. And they did manage to make a lot of his gates and things which are concrete on tracks do work. And we tested them through near destruction. Some of his hinge details, concrete gate on a hinge, for which he then designed all of these things. These things are remarkably well thought out. I think these are the spares that got into the family possession. There we go. And that's him. That's Carlo. I do strongly recommend visiting, because there's a poetry in this which a photograph can't show, and a whistle-stop tour can only really give a hint as to. But we had a great time. Richard.
David, thank you. I'll just try and get my my one on the screen. Well, David talked about three major buildings by Carlo Scarpa. I'm going to talk about two more on our way through, finishing up in Venice, because it seems to me that you can only actually understand Scarpa in the context of Venice and what an incredible melting pot Vienna is. And so here we have the palazzo, famous palazzo in Venice on one of the side canals, the now museum of Venezian Stampalia. And then we have on the right the other great late flowering of Venetian design, my fan, Giambattista Tiepolo, who we saw particularly in Udine. So, starting off with the remarkable Canova Museum in Postagno, which is right up in the foothill of the Dolomites, and it's quite an early work of Scarpa's. It's 55 to 57. Canova, I don't know if you've come across him, but he was the great Italian neoclassical sculptor, and I put on the right one of his most, I think, amazingly wonderful works, which is actually a tomb in Vienna, but this in Postagno is the plaster cast for the tomb. So you get is it Fame with the wings? I'm not sure. Leading the lion, who's a faithful lion, and then the tombs, the figures going into this incredible black void of the tomb in its obelisk, in its pyramid. Very extraordinary work. Canova, when he died, and have I got his dates here? He lived from 1757 to 1822. When he died, he was, pretty rich and successful, but he left all of his works in, because they were all made first as plaster casts, and then you made the marbles from the plaster cast in a way that we'll see more of later on. But this is the gallery which was built to receive his works in the early first half of the 19th century, a great neoclassical one. And you can see how the light is effectively simply coming from above, and the figures actually look rather sort of dim and gloomy. So we then go into the extension by Carlo Scarpa, and the figures are all in the way that you saw in the Castelvecchio Museum. They're all sort of freestanding or on specially made brackets from the wall. And I think the particularly remarkable thing in Possanio is the lighting. It's the natural lighting. You see these two windows which are tucked into the corners of the room at high level. And it seems to me that this is very much because if you're lighting figures, you want side lighting and not top lighting, actually, and that's a way of getting light on both sides of the figures. And he manages to make all of these neoclassical plasters fantastically sensual, actually. I mean, they were brilliant, the way the flesh comes through the gauzy drapes and so on. So when you come through the main gallery, what you just saw was ahead of you. If you turn left, that's the left-hand side, then the sculptures go towards a glass wall at the end, which looks out onto the landscape beyond. But it also retreats in plan, it gets narrower, and it also goes down steps. So this is now looking from the far end. And at the far end, you get the three graces, and these are all of these spots that are put onto the plaster for taking off with the big calipers or whatever they use to create the marble. And then behind it, we have another of Carlo Scarpa's squares, and I find that one of the extraordinary things about Scarpa is a mixture of quite strong geometric figures, the step profile, the squares, and this, something which is working entirely against that, which is this overlay, which I can only describe as being on-level decorative. I mean, it's definitely decorative. And the way in the Olivetti that you get the columns of the arcade and then cut straight through them, and then you get the shop front, totally different underneath it, is something which not many of us would dare to do, and not many of us would be able to get past into charity. But that's another matter. Here we have 5 squares, so that as you look down, you're seeing them in silhouette from against the window. But as you come back, you're seeing them lit from the end and with a bit of side light coming in through those those windows. And then you will have noticed square grids right the way through the other projects of Scarpa. So this is the door. Which is a square grid, and as you probably know by now, I love square grids, and I've used them several times. In fact, I'm thinking of trying to write a talk about the square grid in architecture, but I haven't done so yet. So we now move on to a very, very late work of Carlo Scarpa's in Verona. It's a Banco Popolare, 1973 to 78. And here again, it's a mixture of something which is rational, but totally irrational, if I can put it that way. Basically, party of, the ground level on the street, which is blank here, but at this point, this is lighting up to a level which is halfway below ground, if I recall rightly. Then you get the series of windows here, which are partly sitting above this. And here again, we get this step profile. And in these places, just like in Brion, it turns through right angles and becomes a truncated end. We saw exactly the same thing happening at Brion. And then the next level up is a mixture of projecting bay windows and then holes cut into the wall, so that the plane of the window is behind. And that thing about breaking up the planes is a popular technique. And yet, being Carlo Scarpa, you notice that this window is smaller than the others, as I think that one is as well. And I think when questioned about this, he simply said, well, why make them all the same? It's too boring, if I recall my mind. Entirely right. And then the top floor, which is the like a big Tuscan entablature with its treeless and meadow, which you stretch to the point slightly. But this member which holds up the great big steel beam that runs around the thing, it's not quite on the picture here, but in the end bay it drops right down to become a tall window which cuts through. Very, very inventive and strong medicine.
Can I just say, and all of this an extension to the building on the left, that is the main banco. This is all an extension. So that apartment is to the same building.
Mm. And just taking a closer look, I mean, here's where I said the top floor supports come down to the floor below, revealing the sort of inner plane of the wall behind. And then these are all strictly square planes of recession turning back on themselves at these points here. But even these grills here, when you think about it, that's a square grid. It's just that they've combined 2 square or 3 squares in a way which is sometimes horizontal, sometimes vertical, but the basic grid beneath that is the same square grid that's going on elsewhere. So where did all this come from? Well, I would say primarily Venice, but there are, Frank Lloyd Wright had a big influence as well, which I'll come to later on. And so we go to Venice, and this, to my mind, kind of explains everything, because Venice is this absolutely extraordinary city based on maritime trade, and the trade largely with the East. And so you get all of these oriental sort of layers on top of it, these sort of magical domes, and then this fantastic light that you get on occasion, and then the piling up of layer upon layer of history. And there's a sense, I think, in Carlo Scarpa, piling up layers, even when it's a building which is one period, if you follow me. So when we think of these rich layers and what makes them exotic, then San Marco is clearly a Byzantine church. It's not a Western Christian church at all. It's got the domes, the gold leaf, all of course coming from Constantinople, as indeed, as you may know, the famous quadriga, which was in the Hippodrome in Constantinople, and it was stolen by the Venetians in 1204 when they the crusade, which was supposed to be saved Holy Land, was diverted to pay for their unpaid bills for providing a navy to take the Western lords to fight in the Holy Land. They didn't pay for the date, so they went to Venice and raped Venice instead and took those back. And so, as I say, gilded bronze horses of the, I assume, the 4th or 5th century. I'm not absolutely sure. And then in St. Mark's Basilica, this extraordinary onion domes, bulging things, rich materials. And this is the pavement in St. Mark's with amazing patterns. And in fact, if you look hard enough, you can see quite a few square grids here. You have the little one and then the big one on diagonal, and here again. Even these ones, you can take off the diagonals. So that richness, and you find it everywhere in Venice. We stayed on Giudecca, and this just happened to be, a bit of wall the other side of one of the canals. And the turquoise water, the iron thing, some sort of gate, I suppose, and the other half of the gate is missing. And then there's this. You wouldn't find, I think, anything quite that colourful anywhere else. So we now come to what Carlo Scarpa did in Venice, and the Verini Stampalia. And this is the famous bridge which used to take you across and enter the museum across this bridge. Sadly, you now enter by the next door bridge, so you don't go across this one. But you can see all the things that David talked about, the sort of breaking it down into components which are then put together. So the handrails all supported with brackets between two brackets, which are then supporting a central bracket through here. The way that there's a gentle curve following the line of the steel bridge itself. And then what I take it to be, you get a sort of a structural bridge handrail here, but the one you actually touch is on brackets above that, and that's timber. So you get the quality of touch from the thing, and then of course a beautiful little bronze casting where you get the connection. So really enchanting stuff. And then the old river entrance to the palace. These are the two arches onto the canal, and originally the gondolas would have come in at that level. This is Carlo Scarpa having fun, I suppose, with flood defences, if you could put it that way. So you on this side, you're coming up three steps, and then you get the upstand here, so that the flood line would be right up at this point here, and then the gate itself, which is really rather fascinating, but a series of horizontal and vertical bars, but not of the kind that you ever saw anywhere else before, because you have the horizontal here and here, and then two short ones here with offset verticals, making a pattern. And I think that's characteristic of Scarpa and the way things put together, having a decorative element, although there's a constructive element as well. And of course, depending on the fantastic quality of Italian craftsmen, which you probably wouldn't get anywhere else, to be honest. So Then I'd just like to point out this rather extraordinary feature here, which has got rectangular cuts into it, and then at the corner, quite often there's a little square hole cut into there. You see one there and one there, and then when you go around the other side, you see all of that is simply housing these two rather sculptural cast iron radiators, and here again another radiator on specially made brackets, turning the radiator into a piece of sculpture in a way that is great. Then these sort of Venetian embellishments, if I can call it that, with the little gold leaf mosaic inserts into the, we see them here and here. And then the large sheets of glass linking the space through to the garden. And here another of these stone doors. And the ironmongery of these doors is a real joy. I don't have a photograph of it, but they're massive, great things. And of course, the getting that to shut so that it just has a narrow gap is a great thing. So here again, you see the line here with a cutout here, which doesn't exist there, and the cutout here, which doesn't exist there, so that you get the door shut, but there are still two squares left. When you get into the garden, then some more exquisite work, and sometimes I think it's fair to, on the small scale, to think of Carlo Scarpa as a jeweller rather than anything else, and not the sort of architect that most people would kind of recognise or have the possibility even to think about. So here you get the watery rill with the reeds, and then at the point that it cuts through the concrete surround, you have a bronze spout, which lands in the middle of a concentric circles, and then it overflows to here. And then you look at these blocks of concrete here, and each one has got a stone at the corner. They're all different. And I can only think that, obviously, at low level, and maybe the corner of the concrete is most vulnerable, and so he put in stone to do it. But he locked them into position with the concrete. So you see here the concrete is locking in the stone. And here again, this is even more complicated because I think you can just about see that there's a socket here with a tenon, so that this bit of stone is locked into that one, which is locked into the concrete by that nib there. I may be reading too much into it, but I don't think I am. And then here, this is where the water starts its journey around the watery rill. So here's the where it comes out. You can just see the circles of the water, surface of the water, and then it goes along here, and then it goes around here, and then it goes out at the far end, so the very slight slate the whole way. And then the rather mad entrance to the university in Venice. This is a gate, and this gate is shut, believe it or not, but you see that great big wheel there. So the gate is actually from there to there, and this is like a diagonal brace, and the whole thing is cantilevered out. And when you open it up, it all rolls back, so that in that track there, to there, and then that's entirely open. And either side of it, you get more of these sort of planes of recession, and it's they that I think, to some extent, did come from Frank Lloyd Wright, who he admired and who admired him. This is the Arizona Biltmore Hotel with something perhaps similar, and I didn't manage to find any photographs, but some of the villas in the hills above Hollywood, the Ennis Villa, they have these sort of overlapping planks, basically, which maybe the one of the links of these. But that whole thing of planes of recession is one that I'm really fascinated by, and not least at St Albans, where if you look at here, then these are based on the module of a Roman brick, and so these are all square, unmolded square planes of recession, and so you get 3 dots here, and they go up, and they turn left, and then 3 here, which go up, and they turn right. And that sort of sense of splitting out is a real joy at St Albans. And in our own way, we did something similar at St Pancras in realising a version of Gilbert Scott, which was stripped down to its essentials, which is planes of recession based on the module of the brick. So these are brick and a half that way, and then half a brick planes of recession. And the whole of this elevation is nowhere more than 9 inches thick. I mean, it's a column, but a brilliant column. And then again on the floor above, then it becomes the pointed arches. And I mean, these are just a couple of things where I suppose I have enjoyed this sense of disarticulating something and putting it together. In my mind, at least, inspired to some extent by Scarpa. So the paired things with the thing between them, much more rational than Scarpa is called. But it was definitely somewhere in my mind. And then the Romeo and Juliet balcony and the courtyard at Lambeth Palace. So just for the end, let us turn to Giambattista Tiepolo, because we all know about the great period of Venetian painting with Titian, Tintoretto, and the lovely what's it called? No worry. So Tiepolo was born in 1696 and died in 1770. So it's a whole century and a half after the famous Venetian painting school. But I think that he's every bit as great, and he managed to do this thing of Baroque and Rococo theatrical ceiling paintings in a way that one normally is totally revolted by. But in his case, I find myself totally and utterly in awe of his drawing and graphic ability. Well, actually, sorry, go back to here. We went to Udine, where the diocesan palace has, you can see it on the left, the rather remarkable room with frescoes all over by Giambattista. And although it's not one of his greatest works, I mean, it is a absolutely wonderful work, and it shows some of the things which mean that I like him. So you get the animals. They're always the animals, and they're the children who are distracted from what is supposed to be going on in the scene to just do something totally different, and you can see that here. Then you have more animals with the wonderful camels, and then this totally incomprehensible scene, which is Rachel, who is hiding the the household gods which she's walked through. And this is her father, who's now why that should be in the diocesan palace in Udine as a story, I really never quite worked out. But anyway, it's that one. You get two slightly more comprehensible. This is a ceiling painting, and so this is the child who is in front of Solomon. It's one that he says that he's going to chop the child in half and give it to the women who claim it's their child, and so this is the one saying no, and this is the one that I think he's quite happy for him to do that. And then he gets this fantastic chap with his legs and his winged helmet in the foreground here. I don't know what he is, but he's great fun. And then one of these splendid dogs with I'm not sure if we're allowed to call them dwarves. No, you have to say persons of diminished stature, I think. And then just finally, we didn't go here, but in order to extend the taste, which I hope I can, for you for Giambattista Tiepolo, you have to go for his greatest work, the Würzburg. And this is the palace of the. It was one of those places where it was a bishopric, or it was a ecclesiastical piece of property, and this was the incredible palace that was built with the even more incredible ceiling by Giambattista Tiepolo. So the theme of the ceiling is the four continents. So here we have Europe, and this is the architect, Balthasar Neumann, and then lots of the dog and then a bit of architecture, and then this is Fame trumpeting the Prince Bishop or whoever it was, so then we have America, and so the American with her headdress, and this rather fantastic cornucopia. A few more figures lurking in the clouds. And this is Africa, hop, and even more ones called camel. And then Asia with the most wonderful elephant, and I particularly like the end of his trunk. So I'm intending to go to Würzburg next year, and I did see it once at the age of about 16, so I'm really looking forward to going again. And just to finish with, he also did some etchings, and this is from Vari Capricci, some pictures, and it's a nymph and a satyr and two goats. It took me a bit of time to work out why two goats, and I think the answer is that is a second, that's the tail of the first goat, and that is the tail of the second goat, who kind of sort of disappears as you get up to that end. And that is one that I treated myself to buy last year. So thank you. I think that's